Hi, I'm Luke. Today on Out of Darts, we are going to take a look at Elite 2.0. Whoa. Let's get going. All right, so everybody's been online kind of ranting and complaining about these blasters. This is the most disappointing thing I've seen from Hasbro since being in this hobby and since liking Nerf blasters. These blasters, I should be clear, are great for anybody who never wants to mod. But let's talk about them really quick before I get into ranting too much. I bought the 4 primary class blasters because they were the ones that were the most compelling. I skipped the blaster that looks like basically a triad, and I skipped the other one that is essentially a hammer shot, or I guess it's a little bit more like a strong arm. But I was mostly interested in the primary class blasters because this is a very new direction for Nerf. They're making reshells essentially of all their existing blasters. Across the entire Elite 2.0 lineup, I find them to be very ergonomically unsatisfying. I find the color scheme to be great. I love the color getup, but beyond that, I am incredibly disappointed. The 4 major offerings include this, which is the Echo. This is essentially a Retaliator reskin. The blaster is fine. It's not very comfortable. The mag's a little clunky, and the tolerances are pretty bad on these parts as far as the fit and finish. We get a short little goofy stock that is pretty much unusable for an adult, but of course these are intended for children. I'm going to get back to the biggest fault because the biggest fault is across all of the blasters. Next up we have a Shockwave, which is a drum-fed blaster, relatively straightforward. Again, similar handle that I'm not a huge fan of. Next we have what was supposed to be our saving grace, and that was the next version of the Strife. The Phoenix is the next version of the Strife, slightly less comfortable, more chonky up front. I don't mind the look and aesthetic of it, other than the comfort itself, but it does kind of have that like bolter look and a really chonky blaster. And lastly, we've got the successor to the Rapid Strike, the Turbine. The Turbine has got probably the most promise out of all of these because it does have a full auto pusher, very similar to a Rapid Strike, rather than a belt-fed system like the Hyperfire. So this is the clear winner out of the whole lineup. But now we get to the major problem. Hasbro has decided to solvent weld, or sonically weld rather, all of these blasters. Many of them also feature clips, making them even more difficult to get open. They're all impossible to get back together easily. There are some great guides that people have been doing, like Wacom and Xavier, on how to get past them, but it's really a huge hassle for something that you bought with your own money. And I think this is really indicative of where Hasbro is going and where the third-party companies are going. On the same year that Hasbro releases this Elite 2.0 lineup, which to me just looks like another cash grab, the third-party companies such as Dart Zone and X-Shot have given us phenomenal releases that don't include all of these restrictions on opening them up. I think it's very clear which companies we should be supporting, and at some point, we definitely need to talk about what we call this hobby, because it's not Nerf modding anymore if this is what Nerf is going to continue to give us. I am hopeful that at least the rival lineup will continue to have standard toy screws that aren't, where the shells are not glued together, because those are a little bit more of a premium offering, so they don't cheap out on the assembly. I assume that most of this is done based on cost. It's cheaper to remove screws both from an assembly process in the factory. It takes less time, it also costs less money. But for us, it's really a bad deal. And every one of these blasters is less comfortable than its predecessor, less functional, and harder to get at. Just to look at a few things. This grip, I can barely get my finger through this mag release and trigger here. The trigger itself is the mag release is very hard to actuate with the back of your finger. The grip itself is very uncomfortable. All in all, it is hands down a worse blaster than just getting a Strife, which hopefully we can keep buying new or at least find thrifting all over the country. The Turbine is a very similar story. We've again got a very cramped finger well here and a very uncomfortable mag release that I find difficult to remove. It is a little sharp on the front. It actually really doesn't feel good on the back of your finger. I would have much preferred just a paddle release, since this isn't as polished as some of the other community designs that have a similar mag release. This all boils down to different companies taking vastly different approaches with their consumers. Hasbro has made it abundantly clear that we are not their market, and I think we need to vote with our dollars and not buy these blasters. I think you should buy some of the great offerings from the Zuru X-Shot line, or from Dart Zone, or from the Adventure Force line at Walmart, because those offerings are far better blasters than these are. I didn't want to do individual reviews of all these because I don't think these blasters were worth your individual reviews. I got them all assuming I'd be able to, create upgrade parts, cages, springs, but I'm going to call it now and say that it's not really worth the effort. If you have a good chance of breaking something while you take it apart, I don't think people are going to mod it. I personally don't want a blaster that I have to break clips or de-weld solvent welds to get open, and then anytime I have to service it, I have to deal with that again. Not to mention the fact that it will never go back the same way. To me, it's just really, really disappointing to see Hasbro totally abandon, our hobby and the core here. And when it really comes down to it, this is a small hobby. There are a lot of us, but it is really tiny compared to the number of kids out there buying blasters. That said, I think we have a huge impact in sharing the knowledge of these, doing the review videos, and letting them know that this isn't what we want. And I'm hoping that maybe someday Hasbro will pivot and we'll get to see something we do want. I am expecting Hyper to be rather interesting. It obviously got pushed. We were expecting it to come out this year, and we've heard very, very little. I'm always waiting on Foam Blast and their Nerf news segment to find out what's coming next, because it's a great place to catch all of the news for this hobby in one place. That said, we haven't seen much, so I am hopeful that maybe Hyper will be a little bit of a departure from the releases of this year, because there really haven't been any Nerf blasters that I'm interested in. I think the Mandalorian blaster that just got teased is probably the best cosmetic looking blaster that Hasbro has put out, but at $120, it is not a modding platform mass market thing. It's definitely a niche collector's item. That said, I kind of really want one, but $120 is a little bit rich to just sit on my shelf. So we'll see about that, whether I get a pre-order, but I suspect I probably will. Gonna have to talk to the wife about that one. Some of these Nerf purchases are getting a little out of hand. Anyway, I'd love to hear your comments on Elite 2.0. Have you had luck modding any of these? I hate to be so negative on this stuff because I'm just not a negative person when it comes to products and cool things, but these are just disappointing. And I would love to see Hasbro hear this feedback from us and change course, because there's no reason for them to lock it up for anything other than discouraging modding and making it cheaper. And I think ultimately, if you can't fix something that you own that's broken, that's a shame. In case you are going to buy these, the Echo comes in at $30. The Turbine comes in at $40. The Shockwave comes in at $25. And the Phoenix comes in at $25 as well. I'm not going to put the links for these in the description because I truly hope you don't actually buy them. I think there are better offerings both from Nerf, but especially from the third-party companies like Dart Zone with their Adventure Force and Adventure Force Pro lines, and Zuru Toys with the X-Shot lines. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to have a much more positive review of something else in the future, but this is definitely not it. Until next time, I'm out of darts.